Xtalks connects professionals in the life science, medical device, and food industries with useful content like webinars, job openings, articles, and virtual meetings to help you succeed in your career. This food industry-focused podcast brings together some of our editorial staff to share insights into the latest B2B industry news to help keep you up to date.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Xtalks Food Podcast. I'm Sydney Perlmutter, Senior Food Industry Journalist and Webinar Moderator at Xtalks.com, and this week I'm joined by Sarah Hand and Aisha Rashid. Thank you very much for joining. So I'm going to get us started with a story about the latest allergen that's been added to the FDA's list of major allergies, and that would be sesame. So recently, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration added sesame to its list of major allergens, which will make it easier for people with sesame allergies to safely consume packaged food without fear of an allergic reaction. So beginning this year in 2023, all food and dietary supplement manufacturers, they have to clearly list sesame as an ingredient on product labels. Now, the FDA's initial list of 8 food allergens that cause the majority of serious food-related allergic reactions, which include milk, eggs, fish, crustacean, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, and soybeans. This was established all the way back in 2004. And now sesame is going to become the 9th food to be added to this list, making this the first update in almost 20 years. So this requirement for sesame to be listed on food labels was first signed into law all the way back in April 2021, thanks to the Food Allergy Safety Treatment Education and Research Act, or FASTER Act. Now, the labeling requirements dictate that, you have to the name of the food has to be, I'm going to start that sentence again. The new labeling requirements dictate that the name of the food source of a major allergen must appear either in parentheses following the name of the ingredient, such as, in quotes, natural flavor, and then in parentheses, sesame, or immediately next to the list of ingredients, such as, in quotes, contains sesame. Now, I spoke to someone for a previous interview, and he mentioned this, actually. I hadn't even brought it up, and he said, we're about to see a whole new book of regulations come into effect, with FDA labeling being one of the biggest ones. This was from an interview with Bradley Sachs, and he's the president of Mainline Foods, who I interviewed last year. He continued, so probably the biggest change for us on our packaging labels is we have to redo all of that and add sesame. The FDA stated that even though the requirement that sesame be listed on the label as an allergen is in effect, you still may find food products for sale that don't list sesame as an allergy on the label. The law establishing this sesame labeling does not require food products that were already on their way to the store or in stock before 2023 to list sesame as an allergen on the label. So essentially what they mean by this is that we may still see some foods without sesame as an allergen just because they were produced and they don't want to get rid of food that was already produced. Now, during this transition period, consumers should note that food products on store shelves that were produced prior to January 1st, 2023, like I said, they're not going to be removed or relabeled. That would be wildly wasteful. And the agency reminded shoppers to always check labels on food products each time, since labels and ingredients can change even if it's a staple that they've been eating for many years without an allergic reaction. So this is really important because identifying which foods contain sesame is a vital step in food safety and healthcare, as an estimated 0.2% of children and adults in the U.S. are allergic to sesame. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a big population in the States. So according to the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology, sesame allergies are actually increasing, in part because foods like sushi, hummus, and tahini sauce are more common in the Western diet compared to decades ago. Obviously, an allergic reaction to sesame can look different depending on the person and include varying symptoms like hives, welts, itching, coughing, difficulty breathing, vomiting, or diarrhea. And about 80% of people with a sesame allergy also have another food allergy, and close to 1/3 have had a severe allergic reaction and used emergency medication epinephrine, or an EpiPen. So the new sesame labeling requirements apply to packaged foods, but allergen labeling for foods that aren't packaged, like fresh bagels in a grocery bin, that might vary. So for consumers that do have sesame allergies, the FDA suggests asking employees for allergen information. And since sesame can be hidden in everyday snacks and meals, it's recommended to ask plenty of questions about ingredients and food preparation in order to stay safe. So I just threw a lot of information at you about sesame allergies, how many people have it, and I just, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Since this list hadn't been updated in almost 20 years, I thought this was major news. And since I've been writing about food, I'm sort of programmed to know, oh yeah, there's 8 major allergies. Well, now there's a 9th one. I'm just wondering, like, do you think that this should have happened sooner, or do you think it's happening now more because we're seeing more sesame allergies than we used to?
Yeah, I think it's probably the latter. I think prior to this, maybe sesame was not a big ingredient in a lot of foods, and a lot of people weren't exposed to it. Like you said, products and foods like tahini and other foods made with sesame weren't very popular back, let's say 10, 20 years ago. But like you mentioned, because they've become more popular and more people are having them and are exposed to them. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot more sesame allergies. And so that spurred the need to make these changes. So it's interesting to see how once new foods are introduced into sort of the market and to people and to consumers, how that can spur changes. But yeah, very interesting and very important. I didn't know so many people. I mean, it's 0.2%. It seems like a small number, but it's still like, a number. So I think, and it seems that like a lot of people do have this issue. So enough for this to be added to the list of allergens. So yeah.
Yeah, it made me sort of start thinking about, and I could look into this further, but what those qualifications are in order to be added to this list. Like, how many people have to have this allergy, or like how severe are the reactions, or yeah, because with many allergies that are, I guess, less common, the onus is so much so on the consumer to know, whether they should beware of a product or not. So I guess sesame was deemed a common enough or severe enough allergy to be added to, the FDA's list. And it also made me wonder about allergy notifications in restaurants and other settings.
That's so true, yeah.
Especially because like foods that a lot of we go eat sushi, we have, it's very common, and I wonder if
sushi is a big one.
If something is going to shift there as well, if they need to blatantly state that on a menu, because even though to us it might be common knowledge, it's still important just for the reputation of the restaurant and people's safety. So I'm not sure if things will change there too.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting that the FDA is requiring this now, as you say, Sydney, considering the other allergens that had to be labeled before. And I was thinking about the point you made about how any packaged foods that may contain sesame, aren't going to be pulled from shelves right now and relabeled. And of course, that makes sense. But I was thinking about how it's okay. I'm losing my train of thought. I was thinking about how large of a job that is for food manufacturers who, have their labels in place now to have to add that. And of course, it's for a good reason, as well as the extra role of the FDA now to not only monitor these other allergens in foods, but also sesame, because the FDA often sends out warnings due to undeclared allergens and recalls. And it got me also thinking about how long the longest shelf life would be on a packaged food that contains sesame right now, So like, how long would I don't know, like a package of crackers that contains sesame be on the shelf, maybe be unsold before that's replaced with like the new package of crackers that has the new labeling and the declared sesame. And so, like, I guess how long are consumers who are looking out for this label and need to because they have an allergy, how long will they need to continue to stay, I guess, as vigilant as they are? I mean, maybe the answer is forever, because when you think about a food allergy, you're always going to be careful. You're not necessarily going to trust what's on a label. But yeah, what do you guys think of that?
That's such a great point. It's true. Like labels are not the be all end all for people with allergies who are constantly vigilant anyway. Plus, with foods that aren't even packaged, like bagels from a bakery, or at a restaurant, like you are going to need to ask or use your best judgment anyway. So you're totally right too about how companies like from large to small are going to need to change their labeling and how they've been doing things for a long time, and they've known about this for a long time too. And what I was going to say is that, like, we have this knowledge because this is something that I covered, but I wonder, like, general consumers, like, are they even going to know about this or notice this? Like, it's kind of just something that people with allergies may be aware of, and us as food industry insiders may be aware of too, but it's so hard to like disseminate this information to everybody, and it may go unnoticed in the general consumer's life, truly.
I have seen sesame being pointed out on some food packages. I don't know if that's a thing in Canada, but I don't know if you guys have seen it. I've seen
That's
it, like,
true.
contains sesame. I have seen that.
I've also, what, I've seen it on products too that we'll say like may contain like things like peanuts, tree nuts.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if they're just covering themselves in a broad way to say this is made in the same facility as other products, let's say. So maybe this product doesn't contain it in its list of ingredients, but it certainly could come in contact with equipment or machinery that has also come in contact with these allergens.
Yeah, I'm just looking. Sorry.
Yeah.
I just got so excited there. Sorry. Finish your thoughts, Sarah.
No, I was going to say, but that's a really good point. It could even be a difference in terms of the Canadian regulations or imported products, or it could just be manufacturers kind of like getting ahead of just putting that claim on there, that broad claim to cover themselves and, protect those with allergens.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at foodallergycanada.ca, and they list sesame as a priority allergen by Health Canada. So, yeah, so I think the FDA is a bit behind there.
I guess up to this point, at least in America, if there were sesame labeling like allergy warnings, it was probably voluntary, and now the only difference is that now it's mandatory. Now they need to because they're liable to say it. But yeah, maybe in Canada we have been maybe there's we're just ahead of the curve with these things. Which is cool. Or maybe, like, have you seen it on mass-produced? This is such a specific question. I'm just wondering if, like, smaller companies were, like, doing it as opposed to larger.
I think I have. Like, it just seems to me like I've seen it a lot. Maybe more so recently, but I've seen it, yeah. So, even on mass-produced stuff, I can say probably, yeah. So I'm used to seeing it, basically. So that's why I'm kind of surprised that it's coming out now in the US, but interesting.
It makes me wonder about at what point would it be easier for a food manufacturer to just remove a sesame ingredient from its product, as opposed to having to put this on the label. I mean, I guess the initial energy put into changing the labels and everything that goes along with that. I mean, once that's done, that's done. But I wonder, like, if a manufacturer is using sesame oil and it's like way the heck down on the list of ingredients, like close to the end, so there's not much in there, would they consider, if it's not going to change the taste or the texture or other qualities of the food, would they just consider changing to a less or non-allergenic oil, let's say. Or if they just had like a sprinkling of sesame seeds in something, and then they're like, you know what, we don't really need these.
Worth it, yeah.
I don't know, just to reach a larger consumer base if the the number of people with allergies is kind of on the rise. Just as we've seen, I think other products, particularly those marketed towards kids, like granola bars, I think even candy bar manufacturers have really put a push in the last few years on creating some in like peanut-free facilities, because they want it to be something that can be purchased by parents and given to their kids that have allergies. So I wonder if we'll start to see, less use of sesame ingredients in products that don't completely rely on it,
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, in the past, I've written about several companies that are like allergy friendly, and even though it wasn't FDA mandatory to list sesame as a major allergen back then, a lot of these companies that specialize in allergy friendly products excluded sesame anyway. So it's already like a well-known allergen, even here in Canada too, that we've already been listing it as an allergen. So yeah, I think this is just sort of it's been made official by the FDA, and that's a good point. Maybe we will see companies shying away from using sesame oil or sesame seeds in their products, just to accommodate more consumers, or at the very least, now they have to put it as an allergen.
Avoid the label.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, well, moving on to something not as appealing as sesame, in my opinion, but the EU, the European Union, recently approved the use of Archetta domesticus, which is more commonly known as the house cricket, in European consumers' food. So the newly approved regulation will allow food producers to introduce the partially defatted dry powder of the house cricket into the EU food market. So EU food makers can now use house cricket powder in the production of several foods. I'm about to list off so many, including pizza and pasta-based products, nuts and oil seeds, snacks and sauces, meat preparations and soups, multigrain bread and rolls, crackers and breadsticks, cereal bars, dry premixes for baked products, biscuits, processed potato products, legume and vegetable-based dishes, whey powder, maize flour-based snacks, beer-like beverages, and chocolate confectionery goods. I don't really think they missed any food group there at all. So basically, they could start.
Beverages really sticks out there. I've got some questions.
What is a beer-like beverage? Beer?
Non-alcoholic?
Oh yeah, that's true. It could be. Yeah, you're totally
with
right.
cricket powder for some reason, anyways.
Oh, no.
Extra source of protein, I suppose. So this approval came after a scientific opinion expressed by the European Food Safety Authority, or EFSA, which verified and approved the safety of the new powder. Now, the agency also approved the powder production process, which includes a 24-hour fasting period for the insects before they're frozen, washed, thermally processed, have their oil extracted, and finally transformed into dried up powder. Now, house crickets aren't the only insect to gain approval in the EU. Earlier this month, the EU Commission also approved the introduction of the frozen, paste, dried, and powdered forms of the Alphitobius diperinus larvae, which is also known as the lesser mealworm, to the consumer food market. The insect's larvae have also been found safe by the EFSA, and in approved forms are now allowed as ingredients in several food products and supplements. Food containing house crickets or lesser mealworm products will require appropriate labels, since some researchers believe that these insects could cause allergic reactions in consumers allergic to crustaceans, dust mites, and mollusks. See, it's all tied back. It's all related to allergies this episode. But we'll get to that soon because I want to hear your thoughts on that. So the two insect preparations will join the list of EU-approved insect foods, including a specific form of mealworm and the dried powder of the migratory locust, and its regulations will take effect at the end of this month. Aside from these approvals, 8 other applications for insect foods have been presented to the EU and are currently under evaluation. Now, as dietary habits are rapidly changing and the willingness of consumers to try new protein-rich products is increasing, edible insects are gaining more interest among European consumers. Although increasing the Western appetite for insects might still be a challenge. International consumer acceptance would likely be driven by a change in socio-cultural aspects, product demand, accessibility, and sustainability. Connected to the theme of sustainability, insects can contribute to reducing the burden of food waste, being fed with underused agri-food byproducts like vegetables, fruit, and starch products, or food no longer fit for human consumption. Because of the vertical farming techniques implemented, insect farming requires less arable land, and insect farmers use crates aligned vertically to rear their insects. And despite the growing number of vegetarians and vegans and a shift to plant-based or lab-grown meat, these solutions may not be practical for every country. At the same time, global demand for meat is still accelerating, so it is critically important to develop more efficient ways to produce those animals that consumers are consistently demanding. So, as a source of protein, over the last few years, it's become a little bit more popular, whether it's like a cricket powder or insect powder. And in many countries, it is consumed as a snack on its own. But I think, like I mentioned, getting people in North America even to just be comfortable with the fact that they're consuming crickets will be a little bit more difficult and might take some time. But back to this potential allergic reaction, I thought that was so interesting just because this is kind of like a new food product, and it needs to go through this, this testing as well. Would you have thought anything of it?
Well, I don't think I would have immediately made that connection, but as soon as you said it, it made sense to me. So you said people with a shellfish allergy might also have an allergy to these insects, and I would think it's because of the chitinous exoskeleton that insects have, that shellfish have as well, and so I can see that being something that we don't know a lot about, but it's good that somebody's thinking ahead there. And as you say, obviously these products will have to be labeled pretty heavily. Another thing I thought that was interesting that you said was the crickets are defatted before they're made into a powder. Do you know the significance of the defatting? Are they otherwise high in fat, or would it maybe not allow for it to turn into a powder if they had too much of that fat retained?
That's a very good question. I think just based off of the process, it's kind of a necessity rather than a dietary thing. And because I'm not too sure how fatty they would actually be if they weren't defatted. But since they also have to go through that 24-hour fasting period, I feel like the defatting is more for the purpose of sort of like getting the insect down to like its bare bones sort of thing, and like just consuming like the best parts of it. But don't take my word on that. That's just me speculating. I didn't find anywhere why they're defatted. But yeah, it likely has to do with the process and being able to turn it into a powder, because if it wasn't defatted, they might have some issues there.
Right. Okay.
Apparently, it also impacts taste and overall liking, sensory properties of foods. It's also easier to incorporate into foods as well, as I'm reading here. So, yeah, and just general process of, improving the nutritional value as well. So, yeah, there is definitely reason in terms of why that's done.
I wonder if it helps with shelf life as well, because, foods like nuts and seeds that are high in fat do go off, like they go rancid. And so even if you like powderize something, it could definitely go off. So maybe by defatting it extends the shelf life as well.
That's a very good point. Yeah. Now, I was thinking, I rattled off such a long list of foods, and beer-like beverage. Now, what would be your willingness to try foods that contained powdered house cricket?
Oh boy.
If, like, let's say if you couldn't really taste it or if it didn't make a difference, would you be willing to try that and regularly have a product that had it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. As long as, let's say the product doesn't have like the image that you've used here, Sydney, in your article.
Apologies for that. But there's nothing
Viewer
more appealing. I tried to find something more appealing. There's white space around it.
You know what? I feel more open to having cricket-based products, especially if it's like in a powder. You can put anything in a powder, and I feel like I wouldn't have a problem with it because you don't even really know it's there. But the idea of, you were talking about the mealworms, which were also considered, safe to eat by the European Union. There's something a little bit less, I should say, appetizing maybe about that. But again, if they're in like some sort of powdered form, they're non-distinguishable.
Powder, you're good.
Yeah, I think I'm like down to try it. Now, if it was going to be like the whole thing, I think that's a bit more of a leap. But I can see that manufacturers are trying to get in the most palatable way for European consumers, which would be to just make it into something that does not resemble an insect that can be added to other foods.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, speaking of palatable, I briefly mentioned supplements because we don't, at least in my opinion, I don't think any of us get really enough protein, at least on a daily basis. I don't think we get enough protein, and maybe down the line there'll be supplements with ground up cricket powder in them or something similar to like fish oil pills. Like no one really is eating or wants to drink fish oil, but in a pill supplement format, so much more palatable and so much easier. So I feel like this like insect market has a really big potential in the supplement pill category as well, to help people who don't get enough of those nutrients.
Yeah, I agree on that front, but now I'm thinking about like vegetarians and vegans. Like, how is this going to impact them? Because a lot of the foods that you listed here, I mean, it's like, breads and rolls, and I don't think these typically have meat-based products in them. Crackers, cereal bars, like this is a lot of like, everyday routine stuff that vegetarians and vegans can have. Now, if you have this added component of the cricket powder, that's going to, maybe exclude them or will exclude them. So that's going to be interesting as well to see how manufacturers and food companies are going to handle that. And if, I guess they'll have to do a market analysis and to see if that's going to be worth doing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's going to come down to, and we talked about this on the last episode, like why people are vegan or vegetarian, right? Because if it's purely for avoiding meat and dairy for health reasons, then they probably may not be willing to have any cricket or insect based foods. But if it's more of the sustainability reason, then they might be, because insects and crickets and whatnot are being touted more as a sustainable source of protein, and they can help eliminate food waste, and there's many talking points there about this and how it relates to sustainability. So it'll probably come down to like personal willingness to like include it in someone's diet, vegan, vegetarian, or otherwise. I think just because it's still so new to us and
the novelty
a little
aspect
creepy.
there. It's going to take probably the acceptance, especially in like North America. I think in Europe, they've already sort of started introducing this, but I think in North America, it's extremely novel still. So it's going to be interesting. Yeah.
I think one problem as well is that this is going to be expensive to start with. I think I mentioned a few years ago, I saw, in a local grocery store, even here in Canada, cricket powder or cricket flour, I think they were calling it. And it was like for a little bag, maybe like 500 grams or something like that, it was like $15. And, you compare that on the shelf to other flours, it's obviously going to be more expensive. Probably not only because of the novelty, but because of the processes that are in place right now to, I guess, rear the crickets. So in theory, it should be a more sustainable and honestly cheaper form of protein than something like, other meats, cattle and chickens and things like that. But like anything else that we see, especially in the food space, there's sort of like a period where it's new, it's novel, it's expensive, and then they have to see if consumers really latch on. And then I think maybe as demand grows, if it grows, the cost maybe will come down as it's added, let's say, to more products. And it also got me thinking about this idea of bioaccumulation. So you said, Sydney, how they are like fasted for 24 hours before they're processed. And I was thinking about, the diet of the crickets, and then we're eating the crickets. I wonder if there's going to be a market for, in the future, like quote unquote organic crickets that are only fed, organic produce or something. Because people now, even if you're not vegetarian or vegan or looking for an alternative protein source, some people will only eat, grass-fed beef as opposed to grain-fed. And I think, like you said, it comes back down to your values and like why you're choosing to eat the way you do and how you're choosing to spend your food dollars. But I can foresee a future in which maybe there's multiple categories of crickets that you can buy.
Organic versus not. Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, this is just a huge experiment that will last over, decades probably. Just like because there's very few like new foods in our lifetime that we haven't already had. And I think this may or may not be one of them, depending on whether or not we're willing to try it. We could compare it to plant-based meat products in that they've taken decades for it to gain as much popularity and scalability as it has today. So I look at the cricket market in like a similar way. It's a huge experiment, but we're really at the start right now, which is just it being approved as safe to eat, and that's only in the EU. So I will definitely keep my eye out, in years to come, to see whether it's on our shelves here in Canada, and what the perception is going forward. All right, well, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Xtalks Food Podcast. If you like today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks, everyone, and see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Xtalks Food Industry Podcast. If you enjoyed our discussions today, please share the episode with your friends and colleagues, and be sure to subscribe in order to be notified when a new episode is released. To join in on the discussion, you can find Xtalks on social media, email podcast@xtalks.com, or comment on the articles directly. Links are in the show description. Take a moment to join our community at xtalks.com to get access to everything we have to offer, including webinars, job listings, virtual meetings, articles, and more. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast are those of the speakers sharing them. They should not be taken as professional advice and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.